In the eastern tower of the royal palace, a sound echoed through the marble halls. It was a sound that had not stopped for 5 weeks. The crying of two infant princes, raw and relentless, piercing through stone walls and silk curtains alike. In the grand nursery, 15 nursemaids stood in various stages of exhaustion. Some leaned against the carved mahogany walls. Others sat on velvet cushions, their fine uniforms rumpled and stained. And in the center of the room, in twin cradles draped with cloth of gold, Sebastian and Theodore thrashed and screamed with the kind of desperation that breaks hearts and shatters nerves. Helena, the head nursemaid, pressed trembling fingers to her temples. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her graying hair, usually pinned in a perfect coil, hung loose around her shoulders. She had tried everything: warm milk, cool cloths, rocking, singing, prayer. Nothing worked. Nothing had worked for 5 weeks. The princes were 2 years old. Old enough to walk, though they rarely did anymore. Old enough to speak simple words, though they had not spoken since their mother left. They only cried, day after day, night after night, a sound that had become as constant as the palace bells. Helena looked at the other nursemaids. She saw her own exhaustion reflected in their faces. They worked in shifts now, 4 hours at a time. Any longer, and they began to hear the crying even in their sleep. Outside the nursery windows, autumn rain fell on the palace gardens. The leaves had turned gold and crimson, but no one noticed. The beauty of the season seemed like mockery when the palace itself had become a prison of sound. Down in the kitchens, far below the nursery, a girl stood elbow-deep in dishwater. Rosalind was 13 years old, though she looked younger. Small for her age, with dark hair that never quite stayed in its braid and eyes the color of river stones. She wore the plain gray uniform of a scullery maid, the lowest rank in the palace hierarchy. The fabric was rough against her skin, already damp from the steam rising from the washing basin. Around her, the evening shift moved in practiced chaos. Cooks shouted orders. Kitchen boys ran between the ovens and the serving stations. House servants swept in with silver platters barely touched, the remains of dinners that no one had appetite for anymore. Not with that sound echoing through every room. A platter crashed into the basin next to Rosa, sending a wave of greasy water across her chest. She gasped and stumbled back. Chunks of congealed fat clung to her apron. The smell of old meat and wine made her stomach turn. She looked up instinctively, some small part of her still hoping for an apology, still believing that people might be kind. But the house servant was already turning away, laughing at something his companion said. Rosa heard fragments of their conversation. Those princes are at it again. Non-stop for 5 weeks now. The king has not slept properly since the queen left. Their voices faded as they disappeared through the doorway. Rosa exhaled slowly and returned to her washing. Her hands were raw and wrinkled from the water. Her shoulders ached from hours of scrubbing, but she kept working because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering. She whispered to herself so quietly that no one could hear. One day, you will matter. The voice cut across the kitchen like a knife. Who are you talking to? Rosa's stomach dropped. She turned to find Ivy standing in the doorway. 10 years old, 2 years younger than Rosa, but Ivy had something Rosa would never have. She had shifted for the first time last spring, transforming into a sleek red wolf that made the adults coo with pride. That made all the difference in this world. Rosa kept her eyes on the pot in her hands. No one. She scrubbed harder, though the copper already gleamed. Do not react. Do not give them satisfaction. The apple core hit Rosa's temple hard enough to blur her vision. She flinched. Her hands jerked in the water. The pot slipped from her grip and landed with a tremendous splash. Laughter erupted. Not just from Ivy now. Some of the scullery maids had turned to watch. Entertainment was scarce in the palace these days. The head cook's voice boomed across the kitchen. Rosalind, clean yourself up and get out of my kitchen. You are dripping all over my floor. Rosa's voice came out barely above a whisper. Yes, Chef Whitmore. She grabbed a rag that reeked of onions and something sour and fled. Low, bitter laughter followed her into the corridor. Her bedroom, if it could be called that, had once been a storage cupboard. There was space enough for a thin straw mattress and nothing more. Rosa pulled the door shut behind her and stood in the darkness. From somewhere far above, muffled by stone and distance, came that sound. Thin and wavering, the crying of the princes. It never truly stopped. Sometimes it faded enough that you could almost forget it. But then it would surge back, piercing and relentless. A reminder that something in the palace was broken. Rosa sank down onto her mattress and wrapped her arms around her knees. In the darkness, she allowed herself to remember. She had been small, 5, maybe 6 years old. Somehow she had gotten lost in the palace gardens, wandering among the rose bushes and topiary until the sun began to set and fear had crept into her small heart. And then he had appeared. King Matthias, tall and golden in the afternoon light, dressed in riding leathers. He had been returning from a hunt. Rosa remembered the way he had looked at her, not with kindness exactly, but with something that might have been curiosity. He had knelt down beside her. "What is this? A lost little thing?" His voice had been neither warm nor cold, just matter of fact. He had picked her up, and Rosa remembered feeling safe for the first time in memory. He had carried her back to the kitchens himself. She remembered Winnie's face going pale when she saw who was carrying the child. The way the king had said something about finding the girl a place here, despite her condition, despite the fact that she had no wolf. Rosa whispered into the darkness, "The king saved you." It was proof that she was not completely worthless. If a king could see some value in her, then maybe she was not nothing. Her thoughts drifted to the crisis that had consumed the palace for 5 weeks. Queen Isidore had left. The king's own mate had abandoned him and their sons. The official story was vague, something about the queen neglecting her duties, failing to care for the princes properly. But Rosa had heard the whispers. The queen had been seen crying in the corridors. The queen had begged to be allowed to hold her babies. The queen had been kept away from her own children by the king's orders. And then one night she had simply vanished. Rosa's hands curled into fists. How could a mother abandon her children? How could anyone leave those poor babies to cry themselves hoarse? The sound seemed louder suddenly, or perhaps Rosa was simply more aware of it in the suffocating darkness of her cupboard. She lay down on the mattress and closed her eyes. Tomorrow would be the same as today. The same washing, the same mockery, the same loneliness. But at least she had this small space, this place to hide. She did not know that tomorrow would change everything. The morning sun had barely crested the eastern towers when Rosa followed Winnie through the servants' quarters. Her heart hammered against her ribs with each step. She had never been to the family wing before. Servants like her, the lowest of the low, were not permitted in the royal chambers. But Winnie had woken her before dawn, her usually stern face drawn with exhaustion. "Get dressed, quickly. You are coming with me." Rosa had obeyed without question. Winnie was the only person in the palace who showed her any kindness. The head cook, a woman of 42 with iron gray hair and hands roughened by decades of work. She had been the one to find Rosa in the gardens that day, the one who had convinced the king to let the child stay. Now they climbed the marble stairs, and with each step, the crying grew louder. Helena met them at the nursery door. The head nursemaid looked like she had aged 10 years in 5 weeks. Her hands shook as she gripped Winnie's arm. "Please, I do not know what else to do. We have tried everything. The king is threatening to dismiss the entire household staff if we cannot make them stop." Winnie's jaw tightened. "Show me." The nursery was beautiful. Even in her distress, Rosa could see that. High ceilings painted with clouds and songbirds, windows that overlooked the palace gardens, thick carpets in shades of blue and gold, and in the center, twin cradles carved from dark wood and draped with silk. Inside those cradles, 2 small bodies writhed and screamed. Rosa had never heard anything like it. This was not the fussing of tired babies. This was grief, raw and animal and utterly inconsolable. 3 nursemaids huddled near the windows, their faces haggard. They barely looked up when Winnie entered. Winnie moved to the nearest cradle without hesitation. She lifted Sebastian, the older twin, by 7 minutes and settled him against her chest. She swayed gently, humming a lullaby Rosa recognized from her own childhood. The baby screamed louder. He turned his face away from Winnie, his little fists flailing. His brother Theodore took up the cry in harmony, their voices blending into a sound that made Rosa's bones ache. Winnie tried everything, rocking, singing, walking in slow circles around the room. Nothing changed. If anything, the crying intensified. Rosa stood frozen near the door, holding the basket of clean linens Winnie had asked her to carry. She watched the woman who had been her only kindness in this place fail utterly to comfort these children. And then, without thinking, without planning, Rosa's feet moved. She crossed the room in a daze. She reached the second cradle and looked down at Theodore. His face was red and swollen from crying. His whole body shook with the force of his screams. Rosa set down the basket. She laid her hand on the baby's heaving chest. Theodore went still. His eyes popped open, wide and dark and startled. He stared up at Rosa as if he had never seen another person before in his short life. The silence was so sudden it felt like a physical thing. In Winnie's arms, Sebastian stopped crying mid-breath. He twisted in her grip, reaching toward Rosa with both hands, making small, urgent sounds that were not quite words. Rosa did not think. She simply opened her mouth and sang. It was the lullaby Winnie had sung to her when she was small, the only song Rosa knew all the way through. Her voice was thin and unpracticed, rough from years of disuse. But she sang. Theodore's breathing slowed, his tiny fist uncurled and reached for her finger. In Winnie's arms, Sebastian squirmed and whimpered, still reaching for Rosa. "Give him to me," Rosa whispered. Winnie stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, she lowered Sebastian into Rosa's free arm. The moment the baby settled against Rosa's chest, he sighed, a long, shuddering exhalation. His small body went soft and heavy. He pressed his face into the crook of her neck and made a sound that was almost like contentment. Theodore, still in his cradle, had not taken his eyes off Rosa's face. For the first time in 5 weeks, the royal nursery was completely, impossibly silent. Helena's voice came out strangled. "How?" Rosa could not answer. She did not know how. She only knew that these babies needed her, and she needed them just as desperately. Because for the first time in her 13 years of life, Rosalind felt chosen. The days that followed took on a rhythm that felt like magic. Rosa would slip into the nursery 3 times each day, morning, afternoon, and evening, always with Winnie or Helena present, always under the guise of helping with laundry or bringing fresh linens. But once inside, the pretense would fade. The twins would see her, and their faces would transform. Sebastian, the more outgoing of the two, would crow with delight and bounce in his cradle. Theodore, quieter and more watchful, would simply reach for her with both hands and refuse to let go. Rosa would gather them into her arms, and they would calm instantly. She would sing to them soft lullabies and nonsense songs. She would tell them stories about the gardens she had explored as a child, about the birds that nested in the palace eaves, about nothing and everything, and they would listen as if her voice was the only sound in the world that mattered. The weeks turned to months. Autumn gave way to winter, and winter softened into spring. The twins grew from babies into toddlers, learning to walk and babble and play. And through it all, Rosa was their constant. Helena and Winnie kept the secret carefully. The other nursemaids were sworn to silence, threatened with dismissal if they spoke of the wolfless scullery maid who had succeeded where everyone else had failed. But whispers spread anyway. They always did in a place like this. Rosa heard them in the corridors, saw them in the sidelong glances of the other servants. The king himself could not calm them. But a kitchen girl can. Unnatural, that is what it is. Rosa did not care about the whispers. She had Sebastian and Theodore, and they had her. That was enough. One afternoon in early spring, Rosa knelt on the thick carpet and watched the twins play. They were nearly 3 years old now, sturdy and bright-eyed. Sebastian was trying to stack wooden blocks while Theodore crawled in circles around them, occasionally knocking the tower down with a shriek of laughter. Rosa reached for Sebastian as he lunged playfully for his brother, but her hand caught on a splinter from one of the wooden blocks. A thin line of blood appeared across her palm. "Ow," she said softly, examining the small cut. Both twins immediately stopped playing. They crawled to her with urgent sounds, their small faces creased with concern. Theodore reached her first and grabbed her injured hand, pressing it against his cheek. Sebastian did the same from the other side. "It is all right, my little terrors, just a scratch." But as she held her hand, she noticed something odd. The sting was fading, faster than it should. She pulled her hand back gently and looked at her palm. The cut was still there, but it looked smaller, less angry, as if it had been healing for hours instead of seconds. "Silly me," she murmured, dismissing the thought. "It was not as bad as I thought." She pulled both boys into her lap, and they went willingly, settling against her like puppies seeking warmth. "You are my little terrors," she murmured, pressing kisses to the tops of their heads. "Do you know that?" Theodore looked up at her with those solemn dark eyes and patted her cheek with one small hand. Sebastian just giggled and burrowed closer. Behind them, Winnie watched from the doorway. Her expression was troubled. Rosa caught the look and felt something cold settle in her stomach. But before she could ask, the nursery door slammed open. King Matthias stood in the doorway. Rosa had seen the king from a distance many times over the years. At ceremonies and formal dinners, walking through the palace grounds with his advisors. But she had not been this close to him since that day in the gardens when she was small. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with golden hair that was just beginning to show threads of silver at the temples. His face might have been handsome if not for the hardness in his eyes. He wore riding leathers, as if he had just come from the stables. Those hard eyes fixed on Rosa, and the expression in them made her blood run cold. Not surprise. not confusion, recognition, and something that looked almost like satisfaction. The twins, sensing the change in atmosphere, went very still in Rosa's arms. Sebastian pressed closer to her chest. Theodore made a small, frightened sound. Matthias spoke, and his voice was soft. Too soft. "Let my children go." Rosa's arms tightened instinctively around the boys. She looked to Winnie, to Helena, to anyone who might explain what was happening. But Winnie's face had gone pale as parchment, and Helena had taken several steps back. Matthias took a step into the room. "I said, let them go." Rosa's voice came out small and frightened. "Your Majesty, I was only helping." "The princes needed—" "What they need," Matthias interrupted, "is not to be contaminated by a wolfless servant girl who should never have been allowed near them in the first place." The words hit like physical blows. Rosa flinched, but the twins whimpered and clung tighter to her, and that gave her courage. "Please." They were crying. No one else could calm them. "I was just trying to help." Matthias smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Oh, I know exactly what you were trying to do, child. The question is whether you know what you are." Rosa stared at him, uncomprehending. Matthias crossed the room in 3 long strides. He loomed over her, and Rosa scrambled to her feet, still holding the twins. They were heavy now, solid little bodies that made her arms ache, but she did not let go. The king's voice dropped even lower. "Do you know your name, girl? Your real name?" Rosa's throat felt tight. "Rosalind, Your Majesty." "Rosalind," he repeated. "And do you know your family name?" Silence. Rosa had never had a family name. She was just Rosa, just the wolfless kitchen girl. Matthias leaned closer. His breath smelled of wine and something bitter. "Your name is Rosalind Evangeline, and you are my daughter." The world tilted sideways. Rosa heard the words, but they made no sense. They were sounds without meaning, impossible and absurd. She shook her head, a small, helpless gesture. "I do not understand." Matthias straightened up. He looked at Winnie, who stood frozen in the doorway. "Tell her." Winnie's voice came out broken. "It is true, child. You are the king's firstborn, born 13 years ago to Queen Isadora." Rosa's legs gave out. She sank to the floor, the twins still clutching her. Sebastian was crying now, soft, hiccuping sobs. Theodore had buried his face in her shoulder. "No," Rosa whispered. "That cannot be true." Matthias began to pace. His boots made sharp sounds on the wooden floor. 13 years ago, my wife gave birth to our first child, a daughter. And the moment she was born, I knew something was wrong. There was no scent, no wolf." He spat the last word like a curse. "I wanted to have the child exposed in the woods, but the queen begged. She threatened to take her own life if I harmed the babe." Rosa's vision blurred. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Matthias continued, relentless. "So I made a bargain. The child could live, but only as a servant, hidden among the kitchen staff where no one would know her true parentage. And in return, Isadora would give me proper heirs, children worthy of the throne." He stopped pacing and looked down at Rosa. "It took 12 years. 12 years before she finally bore the twins. And even then I kept the bargain. You lived. I allowed you to exist in my palace." His voice hardened. "I let you live as proof that even the defective can find purpose if they know their place." Rosa could not breathe, could not think. The entire foundation of her world had crumbled to dust. Every kind word she had imagined from the king in the gardens. Every moment she had told herself she mattered because he had saved her. All of it was a lie. Sebastian and Theodore were crying in earnest now, their small bodies shaking. They did not understand the words, but they understood the fear rolling off Rosa in waves. Matthias gestured sharply toward them. "You see? Even now you poison them with your presence. They should not love you. They should not need you." Helena took a tentative step forward. "Your Majesty, perhaps if we—" "Silence!" The word cracked like a whip. Helena stepped back. Matthias turned his attention fully to Rosa. "I have allowed this charade to continue for 10 months, but I see now that it has gone too far. My sons have bonded with you. They prefer you to their own father." His hands clenched into fists. "That ends today. You are to leave this palace immediately. I am sending you to the northern forests, to a hunting lodge that has been abandoned for years. You will live there alone, with only basic supplies. You will survive, or you will not." Rosa's voice came out as barely a whisper. "You are sending me to die." Matthias did not deny it. "If you have the strength to survive, you may live. If not, well, perhaps that is also mercy." He snapped his fingers, and 2 palace guards appeared in the doorway. They moved toward Rosa with mechanical efficiency. Rosa clutched the twins tighter. Theodore was screaming now, his face red and wet with tears. Sebastian had his arms locked around Rosa's neck with a grip that would leave bruises. "Please," Rosa gasped. "Please do not do this. They need me. They need to learn that people leave. Better they learn it now." The guards reached for the twins. Rosa tried to hold on, but they were stronger. They pried Sebastian's small hands from around her neck. They lifted Theodore from her lap despite his thrashing. The boy screamed, high, terrified wails that cut through Rosa like knives. They reached for her with both arms outstretched, their faces contorted with fear and confusion. "Mama," Theodore sobbed. "Come, child. Do not make it worse." But, "Come, child, do not make it worse." But Rosa could not move, could not look away from Sebastian and Theodore, still reaching for her even as the guards carried them from the room. Their cries echoed down the corridor, growing fainter but never truly fading. Matthias looked at Rosa one last time. His expression was unreadable. "The wagon leaves at sunset. Be ready." Then he turned and walked away, and the guards followed, carrying the screaming princes with them. Rosa collapsed. Winnie caught her and lowered her gently to the floor. Rosa curled onto her side and sobbed, great heaving gasps that felt like they might tear her apart. Winnie stroked her hair and wept with her. "I tried to warn you, child," she whispered, "but you have such a good heart." Rosa could not respond, could not speak through the grief that choked her. She had lost everything, the only family she had ever known. And worst of all, she had lost two little boys who called her mama and needed her and would not understand why she had abandoned them. The wagon that came for her at sunset was old and rough, with wooden sides and no cushions. Two guards sat on the driver's bench, neither of them speaking to Rosa. They had been given their orders. Take the girl north. Leave her at the abandoned hunting lodge. Return to the palace. Simple. Clean. Final. Rosa sat in the back of the wagon with a small sack that held a week's worth of dried food, a thin blanket, and a flint for starting fires. Matthias's idea of mercy. As the wagon rolled through the palace gates, Rosa looked back one last time. She could see the eastern tower where the nursery was located. Even from this distance, she could hear the crying. Sebastian and Theodore, inconsolable once more. Winnie had come to see her off, standing at the servants' entrance with her apron twisted in her hands. She had pressed something into Rosa's palm at the last moment, a folded piece of parchment. "Do not look at it now," Winnie had whispered urgently. "Wait until you are far from here. And remember, child, you are stronger than you know." Now, as the palace disappeared behind the trees, Rosa unfolded the parchment. It was a map, hand-drawn but detailed, showing the roads north from the palace. And at the top, in Winnie's careful handwriting, were words that made Rosa's breath catch. "Queen Isadora is in the northern territories. Take the boys to their mother. She never stopped loving any of you." Rosa stared at the map until her vision blurred. Winnie had been planning this, had known it might come to this, and she had given Rosa a way forward, a purpose beyond simply surviving. But how could Rosa possibly reach the twins now? They were locked in the palace nursery, guarded and watched. And she was just one 13-year-old girl, powerless and alone. The wagon rolled on through the darkening forest. The guards up front talked in low voices about inconsequential things. They did not care that they were transporting a child to what might be her death. This was just another job. Rosa pulled the thin blanket around her shoulders and closed her eyes. She thought about Sebastian and Theodore. Imagine them crying themselves to sleep in their cradles, reaching for her in the darkness. She had failed them. The wagon hit a rut in the road. Rosa's eyes flew open, and that was when she heard it, a sound that did not belong, rustling in the underbrush beside the road. The guards heard it too. One of them called out, "Who goes there? Show yourself." More rustling, closer now. And then, bursting from the trees on either side of the road, came two small shapes. Wolf pups, barely larger than house cats, with oversized paws and fluffy coats that caught the last rays of the setting sun. Rosa's heart stopped. She knew those pups, would have known them anywhere. Sebastian and Theodore. They had shifted. At 3 years old, impossibly young, they had transformed into their wolf forms and escaped the palace to find her. The guards cursed and fumbled for their weapons. But before they could do anything, Sebastian launched himself at the nearest guard's leg and bit down hard. Theodore went for the other guard, snarling with a fierceness that should have been impossible for such a small creature. The guards shouted and swatted at the pups, but Sebastian and Theodore were relentless. They darted and snapped and made such a commotion that the horses reared in their traces. The wagon lurched violently. Rosa grabbed the side to keep from being thrown out. And then a voice cut through the chaos. Enough! Winnie stepped out of the trees. She was breathing hard, her gray hair disheveled, but her eyes were fierce. She looked at the guards. The pups have chosen. You can return to the king and tell him his sons escaped. Or you can say nothing and save your positions. Either way, you are not taking this child to die alone in the woods. The guards looked at each other. One of them, the younger, shifted uncomfortably. The king will have our heads if we return without her. Then say she escaped with the pups. Say you could not catch her. Do you really want to explain to King Matthias that his heirs are missing? The guards paled at that. After a long moment, the older one cursed and snapped the reins. We saw nothing. We know nothing. The girl was lost in the forest. The wagon lurched forward and disappeared around the bend, leaving Rosa standing in the road with Winnie and two wolf pups who were already trying to climb her legs. Rosa dropped to her knees and gathered them into her arms. Sebastian licked her face frantically. Theodore pressed his small snout against her neck and made soft whining sounds. You came for me, Rosa whispered. You came for me. Winnie knelt beside them and pressed a leather pack into Rosa's hands. Food, water, the map. Everything you need to reach the northern territories. Come with me, Rosa begged. Please, Winnie, you are all I have. Winnie's eyes filled with tears. She cupped Rosa's face in her rough, warm hands. I cannot, child. Someone must stay behind to mislead the king, to buy you time. And besides, you are not alone. You have your brothers, and you are going to your mother. Rosa's throat closed up. She threw her arms around Winnie and held on tight. I love you, she whispered. You were the only mother I ever knew. Winnie pressed a kiss to Rosa's forehead. And you were the daughter of my heart. Now, go to Isadora. She has been waiting 13 years for this moment. Winnie pulled back and stood. She pointed north. Follow the map. Stay off the main roads. And whatever happens, keep those boys safe. Rosa nodded, unable to speak. Winnie looked at her one more time, her face full of love and sorrow and fierce pride. Then she turned and walked back into the trees, heading toward the palace and whatever fate awaited her there. Rosa watched until she disappeared from sight. Then she looked down at Sebastian and Theodore, who had shifted back to their human forms and were clinging to her legs, naked and shivering in the cool evening air. She wrapped the blanket around them both and picked them up, one on each hip. They were heavy, but she had grown strong from 10 months of carrying them. She looked north, toward the darkening forest and the long journey ahead, toward a mother she had never known, toward hope. All right, my little terrors, she whispered. Let us go home. And with the map clutched in one hand and two precious lives in her arms, Rosalind took her first steps into the unknown. Behind her, the last light faded from the sky. Ahead, the forest loomed dark and endless. But for the first time in her life, Rosa was not afraid. She had purpose. She had family. And somewhere in the north, a queen was waiting for her children to come home. The forest at night was a different world. Rosa had never been beyond the palace grounds. Her entire life had existed within stone walls and manicured gardens. Now she stood at the edge of wilderness so vast and dark, it seemed to swallow the stars themselves. Sebastian and Theodore clung to her, one on each hip. They had shifted back to human form shortly after Winnie left, and now they shivered against her chest despite the blanket wrapped around them. They were too young to understand what was happening. They only knew they were cold and frightened and far from everything familiar. Rosa looked at the map by moonlight. The lines and symbols that had seemed clear in Winnie's hand now looked like meaningless scratches. North, Winnie had said. Follow the map north. But which direction was north? Rosa chose a direction that felt right and began walking. The pack on her back held food for perhaps a week if she was careful. The blanket kept the boys warm, but did little against the chill seeping into her own bones. And with each step deeper into the trees, the certainty that had filled her when Winnie handed her the map began to fade. By the time the first hints of dawn touched the sky, Rosa's legs trembled with exhaustion. Sebastian had fallen asleep against her shoulder. Theodore dozed fitfully, whimpering in his sleep. Rosa found a hollow between the roots of an ancient oak and sank down gratefully. She arranged the blanket around the boys and pulled them close. Their small bodies were warm against hers. Their breathing gradually slowed and deepened into true sleep. Rosa tried to stay awake, tried to keep watch, but exhaustion pulled at her like a tide, and eventually her eyes closed. She woke to Theodore's frightened cry. The sun was high overhead. Rosa had slept for hours, and in that time, the twins had woken hungry and confused. Sebastian was crying softly, his face buried in the blanket. Theodore stood a few feet away, staring at the forest around them with woo-eye. terrified eyes. Rosa's stomach clenched with guilt. She fumbled in the pack and found dried meat and hard bread. She broke off small pieces and gave them to the boys. They ate without enthusiasm, their eyes never leaving her face. "It is all right," Rosa whispered, though she did not believe it herself. "We are going to find your mama. She is waiting for us." Sebastian looked up at her with those solemn dark eyes. "Mama?" The word broke Rosa's heart. She pulled him close and kissed the top of his head. "Your real mama, Queen Isadora, she has been waiting so long to see you." She did not know if they understood. They were so young. But they seemed to take comfort in her voice, and that was something. Rosa consulted the map again. In daylight, she could see more details. A river that ran north through the forest. If she could find that river, she could follow it. She gathered the boys in the pack and set off again. The first day passed in a blur of endless trees and growing hunger. Rosa tried to ration the food, but the boys were too young to understand waiting. They cried when they were hungry, and Rosa could not bear to hear them cry. So she gave them what they needed and tried not to think about what would happen when the supplies ran out. By nightfall, she still had not found the river. The second day was worse. Rosa woke to find Sebastian burning with fever. His small body radiated heat. He cried weakly and would not eat. Theodore pressed close to his brother, making distressed sounds. Rosa had no medicine, no knowledge of herbs or healing. She could only hold Sebastian and pray that the fever would break. But as the day wore on, he grew hotter. His cries became weaker, and Rosa felt the first real tendrils of despair creeping into her heart. She had been so foolish. What had made her think she could do this? She was 13 years old with no survival skills and two babies who depended on her completely. She had no idea where she was going, no idea if the river even existed or if she was walking in circles. As the sun began to set on the second day, Rosa sank down beneath a massive pine tree and allowed herself to cry. Great silent swims that shook her whole body. Sebastian lay limp in her arms. Theodore curled against her side and patted her face with one small hand, trying to comfort her the way she had so often comforted him. That was when she heard the howl, distant at first, then closer, then all around. Wolves, not the shifter wolves of the palace, controlled and civilized. These were wild things, predators who hunted in packs and showed no mercy to the weak. Rosa scrambled to her feet, clutching Sebastian. Theodore shifted instantly into his wolf pup form, sensing danger. His small body pressed against Rosa's legs, and he made a sound that was trying to be a growl but came out more like a squeak. Through the trees, amber eyes gleamed in the fading light. One set, then two, then five. The wolves emerged from the shadows. They were massive, their shoulders level with Rosa's waist. Their teeth caught the last rays of sunlight as they snarled. Rosa backed up against the pine tree. There was nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide. She held Sebastian tighter and felt his fevered body shake with fear. The largest wolf, a gray beast with scars across its muzzle, took a step forward. Rosa closed her eyes and prayed for the first time in her life, not for herself, for Sebastian and Theodore, that someone would find them, that somehow they would survive this. The attack came with a sound like thunder, but it was not the wild wolves attacking Rosa. From the darkness between the trees, another wolf exploded into the clearing. This one was even larger than the gray leader, with a coat of deep brown and gold. Old scars marked its flanks and face, evidence of battles fought and survived. The wild wolves turned toward this new threat. The gray leader snarled a challenge. The brown wolf did not hesitate. It launched itself at the gray with such speed and power that the impact sent both animals rolling across the forest floor. The other wild wolves circled, looking for an opening to attack. Rosa watched in frozen horror as the brown wolf fought with savage efficiency. It was outnumbered 5-1, but it moved like violence made flesh. Every strike was calculated. Every bite found its mark. One of the wild wolves lunged for the brown wolf's exposed flank. The brown wolf twisted impossibly fast and caught the attacker by the throat. The sound that followed made Rosa press Sebastian's face into her shoulder so he would not see. The remaining wild wolves backed away. Their leader lay still on the ground. Two others were injured badly enough that they could barely stand. The survivors melted back into the forest, their howls fading into the distance. The brown wolf stood in the center of the clearing, breathing hard. Blood matted its fur, though Rosa could not tell how much was its own and how much belonged to its enemies. Slowly the wolf turned toward Rosa. Golden eyes met hers. There was intelligence in that gaze, something more than animal instinct. Rosa's breath caught. A shifter. It had to be. The wolf's body began to change. bones cracking and reforming, fur receding. Within moments, a man stood where the wolf had been. He was perhaps 45 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair streaked heavily with gray. Scars marked his face and arms, pale lines against sun-weathered skin. He wore simple clothes, a hunter's leathers that had seen better days. He looked at Rosa for a long moment. Then his gaze dropped to Sebastian in her arms, and Theodore still pressed against her legs in wolf pup form. His expression shifted from wariness to something that looked almost like recognition. "Well," he said, and his voice was deep and rough from disuse, "this is unexpected." Rosa found her voice, though it came out small and frightened. "Thank you for saving us." The man moved closer and Rosa instinctively took a step back. He noticed and stopped, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "Easy, little one. I did not fight off a pack of wild wolves just to hurt you myself." He tilted his head, studying her face. "Though I am curious what a child is doing alone in these woods with two royal pups." Rosa's eyes widened. "You know what they are? I would have to be blind not to recognize the king's sons. The question is how you came to have them, and why you are running north as if all the hounds of hell were on your trail." Rosa hesitated. Every instinct told her not to trust strangers. But this man had saved their lives. And something in his face, beneath the scars and the hardness, seemed kind. "We are trying to reach Queen Isadora," she said quietly, "in the northern territories." The man's expression changed. Something flickered across his face too quickly for Rosa to identify. Surprise, pain, longing. "Isadora," he repeated softly. Then he shook himself and looked at Rosa more sharply. "What is your name, child?" "Rosalind, Rosa." "And how old are you, Rosa?" 13. The man cursed under his breath. He ran a hand through his graying hair and looked up at the darkening sky as if searching for answers there. 13 years old, alone in the forest with two babies and no supplies to speak of. He looked back at her. "Do you even know where you are going?" Rosa pulled out the map with her free hand. The man took it, studied it for a moment, then handed it back. "You are lost. This river you are looking for is west of here. You have been walking in circles." Rosa's eyes filled with tears. She had known it, had felt it in her bones, but hearing it confirmed made the despair wash over her fresh and new. The man sighed. "My name is Barnaby. I live about an hour's walk from here. The boy in your arms has a fever and needs rest. Come with me. Get him well. Then we will talk about your journey north." Rosa looked down at Sebastian. His fever had not broken. If anything, he felt hotter than before. Theodore whined and pressed harder against her legs. "Why would you help us?" Rosa asked. Barnaby's expression softened slightly. "Because a long time ago, I knew someone who would never forgive me if I left children to die in the woods." He paused. "Especially royal children." He turned and began walking. After a moment, Rosa followed. Barnaby's home was a small cabin built against the side of a rocky hill. Moss grew on the roof, the windows were shuttered tight, but inside it was warm and surprisingly clean. Barnaby lit a fire in the stone hearth and gestured for Rosa to sit. She settled onto a worn but comfortable chair and held Sebastian close. Theodore shifted back to human form and climbed into her lap beside his brother. Barnaby moved around the cabin with practiced efficiency. He put a kettle on the fire. He pulled blankets from a chest and draped them over Rosa's shoulders. He brought water and clean cloths and showed Rosa how to bathe Sebastian's fevered skin. "He needs willow bark tea," Barnaby said, "for the fever. I have some dried." He made the tea and helped Rosa coax small sips into Sebastian's mouth. The boy coughed and whimpered but swallowed. Slowly, carefully, the fever began to break. By the time dawn touched the windows, Sebastian was sleeping peacefully. His skin was cool to the touch. His breathing was deep and even. Rosa sagged with relief so profound it made her dizzy. Barnaby sat across the fire from her, watching. His expression was unreadable. "Rest," he said quietly. "You are safe here. We will talk when you wake." Rosa wanted to protest, wanted to stay alert and watchful, but exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight. Her eyes closed. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Barnaby's scarred face, lit by firelight, looking at her with something that might have been recognition. Rosa woke to the smell of cooking meat. Sunlight streamed through the cabin windows. Sebastian and Theodore were awake, sitting on the floor and playing with carved wooden animals that Barnaby must have given them. They looked healthy, happy. The fever was gone. Barnaby stood at the hearth, turning a rabbit on a spit. He glanced over his shoulder when Rosa stirred. "About time. You slept 14 hours. Rosa sat up, her muscles stiff and aching. The boys, Are fine, fed them breakfast hours ago. They have been playing ever since. As if to prove his point, Theodore knocked over a wooden tower Sebastian had built. Sebastian shrieked and tackled his brother. They rolled across the floor, giggling. Rosa could not help but smile. It was the first time in days she had seen them play like normal children. Barnaby brought her food: roasted rabbit, wild greens, bread that was slightly stale but still edible. Rosa ate ravenously. When she finished, Barnaby sat across from her. Now, tell me the truth, all of it. Rosa hesitated, but something about Barnaby's steady gaze made her want to trust him. So she told him everything. The palace, the crying twins, the 10 months she had cared for them, Matthias discovering her and revealing her true identity, the attempted exile, the escape. Barnaby listened without interrupting, but as Rosa spoke, his expression grew darker. When she finished, silence filled the cabin. Finally, Barnaby spoke, and his voice was rough with suppressed anger. Matthias sent his own daughter to die in the woods. He said I had no value. Barnaby's hands clenched into fists. He is a monster. He always was. Rosa looked at him carefully. You know the king. I knew him. Once. Barnaby stood and paced to the window. I was the royal swordmaster. I trained the palace guards, including Princess Isidora, before she became queen. Rosa's breath caught. You knew my mother? Barnaby turned, and the look on his face was complicated, sad and tender and full of old pain. I knew her well. She was 18 when she came to me, demanding I teach her to fight. She was brilliant, quick and fierce. He smiled slightly at the memory. She became my friend. The way he said friend made Rosa think it had been more than that, but she did not press. What happened? She married Matthias. It was an arranged match, and Matthias was jealous. He saw how Isidora and I spoke to each other. He convinced himself there was something improper. Barnaby's expression hardened. He dismissed me, spread rumors. I left the palace with nothing, came here to the forest to live alone. Barnaby returned to his chair and looked at Rosa. That was 12 years ago. I have not seen Isidora since the day she married. Rosa thought about Winnie's words, about how Isidora had been kept prisoner in her own palace. She was not happy, Rosa said softly. Matthias kept her locked away. Barnaby's jaw tightened. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, you need to reach her. She needs to know her children are safe. Will you help us? Please, I do not know the way. Barnaby looked at Sebastian and Theodore, still playing with their wooden toys. He looked at Rosa, 13 years old and utterly alone, except for 2 babies who loved her as if she were their whole world. I will take you as far as the river, he said finally. Show you the way. Make sure you have supplies. Thank you. But even as Rosa said it, she saw something shift in Barnaby's expression, some internal decision being made. He did not voice it, not yet, but Rosa felt it anyway. They left at first light the next morning. Barnaby had spent the previous day preparing. He showed Rosa how to pack efficiently, how to carry the boys so her back would not give out, how to recognize edible plants and find clean water. The twins seemed to sense they were leaving. They clung to Rosa, but did not cry. They had learned in their short lives that crying did not always bring comfort. The forest that had seemed so terrifying when Rosa was alone became almost beautiful with Barnaby leading the way. He moved through the trees like he had been born there, reading signs Rosa could not see and avoiding dangers she did not know existed. At night, he built fires that gave warmth without smoke. He set snares that caught rabbits and small game. He showed Rosa how to gut and clean the animals, though the first time made her stomach turn. You will need to know this, he said patiently. The days passed in steady rhythm, walking from dawn until dusk, making camp, eating, sleeping under stars that seemed impossibly bright after a lifetime beneath palace ceilings. On the 5th night, after the twins had fallen asleep wrapped in a blanket near the fire, Rosa worked up the courage to ask, You are coming with us all the way, are not you? Barnaby poked at the fire with a stick. His face was shadowed, hard to read. I told myself I would only take you to the river. But I keep thinking about what Isidora must have endured. 12 years married to that man, 12 years separated from her child. He stopped, drew a breath. I cannot let you do this alone. He looked at Rosa. I would never forgive myself. Rosa felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back. Thank you. Barnaby nodded. Then, almost awkwardly, he said, You remind me of her, Isidora, the same courage. I do not feel very courageous. Courage is not the absence of fear, child. It is continuing despite it. The days turned into a week, then 2, then 3. Rosa learned to walk for hours without complaint. She learned to read the sky for weather, to listen to the forest for danger. She learned that she was stronger than she had ever known. The twins grew comfortable with the journey. They walked more on their own now, though they still needed to be carried when they grew tired. They learned to shift between forms easily, running ahead as wolf pups to explore, then bounding back to Rosa's side. At night, Barnaby told stories. Not grand tales of heroes and battles, but small stories. About the trees they passed, the animals they saw, the way the forest changed with the seasons. And sometimes, late at night, when he thought Rosa was asleep, he would speak of Isadora, of the way she had laughed, of her determination, of the day she married Matthias and Barnaby had stood in the crowd and felt his heart break. Rosa listened and understood. Barnaby had loved Isadora, perhaps still loved her, and he had carried that love for 12 years, buried deep but never forgotten. On the 14th night, Rosa woke to find Barnaby sitting up, staring into the darkness beyond their camp. His hand rested on the hilt of a long knife. "What is it?" Rosa whispered. "We are being followed. Have been for 2 days." Rosa's blood went cold. "The king's men?" "Most likely. They are good, staying far enough back that I almost did not notice." "What do we do?" Barnaby's expression was grim. "We move faster. Try to reach the northern territories before they catch us. Once we cross into Isadora's land, Matthias's guards will not dare follow." They broke camp before dawn. Barnaby set a punishing pace. The twins, sensing the urgency, stayed quiet. When they grew too tired to walk, Rosa carried them. When her arms gave out, Barnaby took them. They traveled like this for 5 days, hardly stopping to rest. Rosa's body screamed in protest. Her feet bled inside her boots, but she did not complain. On the 19th night, the attack came. They had made camp in a small clearing beside a stream. Barnaby had built the fire small and smokeless. The twins were asleep, curled together under a blanket. Rosa was dozing, her back against a tree. She woke to Barnaby's hand over her mouth. "Do not make a sound," he breathed in her ear. "Take the boys and hide in those rocks. Do not come out no matter what you hear." Rosa's heart hammered, but she nodded. Barnaby removed his hand. Rosa scooped up the twins, blanket and all. They woke but stayed silent, their eyes wide with fear. She carried them to an outcropping of boulders at the edge of the clearing and wedged herself between them. Through a gap in the rocks, she could see the camp. Barnaby stood in the center of the clearing, his knife in one hand. He had shifted partially, his eyes gleaming gold in the firelight, his canines elongated. From the trees emerged 3 figures, palace guards in leather armor, swords drawn. Behind them, tracker wolves. The same animals Matthias used to hunt escaped prisoners. The late guard spoke. "We are here for the princes. Give them to us, and we will let you live." Barnaby's laugh was cold. "I think not. We outnumber you. You hunt children through the forest. That ends here." The guard nodded to his companions. They spread out, circling. The tracker wolves attacked first. They were fast, coordinated, trained killers. But Barnaby was faster. He shifted fully, and the brown wolf that had saved Rosa in the forest emerged once more. He met the first tracker wolf mid-leap, and they crashed to the ground in a tangle of fur and teeth. The guards rushed forward with their swords. Rosa watched in horror as Barnaby fought 3 wolves and 3 armed men simultaneously. It should have been impossible, but Barnaby moved like fury given form. Every motion was precise. Every strike was deadly. One of the guards got through his defense. A blade flashed in the firelight. Rosa saw it slice across Barnaby's flank, saw blood spray dark across the ground. Barnaby yelped but did not slow. He turned and caught the guard's sword arm in his jaws. The sound of breaking bone made Rosa press her hands over the twins' ears. The fight seemed to last forever and no time at all. When it finally ended, 2 guards lay dead. The 3rd had fled into the forest. The tracker wolves were dead or dying. And Barnaby stood in the center of the carnage, breathing hard, blood dripping from a wound in his side. He shifted back to human form and immediately collapsed to one knee. His hand pressed against the wound, but blood seeped between his fingers. His face was pale. Rosa scrambled out from the rocks. She ran to him, the twins on her heels. "Let me see." Barnaby tried to wave her off, but he was weakening. Rosa pulled his hand away from the wound and gasped. It was deep, too deep. The kind of wound that should have already stopped bleeding, but had not. "Poisoned," Barnaby said through gritted teeth. "The blade." Rosa's hands shook. She did not know what to do. All she knew was that Barnaby was dying in front of her, and it was because he had protected them. Sebastian and Theodore, in their wolf pup forms, crept closer. They sniffed at Barnaby's wound, whining, It is all right, little ones, Barnaby said, though his voice was weak. Theodore pressed his small nose against the wound. His tongue darted out, licking tentatively at the blood. Do not, Barnaby started to say, then he stopped. His eyes widened. The bleeding slowed, then stopped entirely. Rosa stared in disbelief as the edges of the wound began to close. Not completely, not healed, but better, enough that Barnaby was no longer in immediate danger. Sebastian joined his brother, licking at the wound from the other side. The healing accelerated. Barnaby looked down at them in wonder, then at Rosa. They have healing ability. That is incredibly rare. Rosa felt tears streaming down her face, tears of relief and gratitude. You are going to be all right. Barnaby managed a weak smile. Thanks to these two. He tried to stand, but his legs would not hold him. Rosa caught him and helped him sit back down. We need to keep moving, Barnaby said. That guard will report back. More will come. You cannot walk. You are still weak. Then you will have to help me. And she did. For the next 2 days, Rosa half-carried, half-dragged Barnaby through the forest while the twins walked beside them in their wolf forms, alert for danger. It was the hardest thing Rosa had ever done. Her muscles screamed. Her back felt like it might break. But she did not stop. Barnaby drifted in and out of consciousness. In his lucid moments, he directed their path. In his fevered moments, he spoke of the past, of Isadora's laugh, of the way she had looked the first time she successfully disarmed him in practice. Rosa listened and understood. Barnaby had loved Isadora, and he had carried that love for 12 years. On the 21st day, they crested a hill and saw it. Spread across the valley below was a military encampment, dozens of tents, smoke from cook fires, soldiers moving in organized formations, and flying from the central pavilion, a banner Rosa did not recognize but somehow knew. Queen Isadora's banner. We made it, Rosa breathed. Barnaby, leaning heavily on her shoulder, managed a smile. We did. They descended the hill slowly. Barnaby's strength was returning, but he still needed Rosa's support. Sebastian and Theodore had shifted back to human form and walked close on either side, their small hands gripping Rosa's skirt. As they approached the camp's perimeter, guards noticed them. Shouts went up. Soldiers rushed forward, weapons drawn. Wait, Rosa cried. We mean no harm. We have come to see Queen Isadora. A woman in a healer's robe pushed through the crowd. She took one look at Barnaby's wound and Rosa's exhausted face and the 2 small boys clinging to her. Get them to the medical tent. Now. Strong hands helped Barnaby. Others tried to take the twins, but Sebastian and Theodore screamed and clung to Rosa with desperate strength. No one could pry them loose. Let them stay with her, the healer said. Come, child, you are safe now. They were led through the camp. Soldiers and servants stared, whispered. Rosa heard fragments of conversation. The princess? But how? That girl, she looks like... They reached a large tent and were ushered inside. Barnaby was laid on a cot. The healer began examining his wound while Rosa stood nearby, the twins still attached to her. Someone needs to inform Her Majesty, the healer said to one of the guards. Tell her we have visitors she will want to meet. The guard left. Rosa's heart began to pound. This was it. After 21 days of running, of fear, of near death, she was about to meet the woman who had given birth to her, the woman who was supposed to be her mother. The tent flap opened. A woman stepped inside, and the entire world seemed to hold its breath. She was tall and slender, with dark hair pulled back in a braid. Her face was beautiful but marked by grief, by lines of pain that spoke of years of suffering. She wore simple armor, practical and well-used. A sword hung at her hip. Her eyes swept the tent, landed on the twins. Her hand went to her mouth. Her whole body began to shake. My sons, she whispered. My babies. Sebastian and Theodore turned toward her. For a moment, they hesitated. They did not remember this woman. Had been too young when she left to have formed memories. But something deeper than memory recognized her. Some bond of blood and scent. Theodore took a tentative step toward her, then another. Then he was running and Sebastian followed, and Queen Isadora dropped to her knees and caught them both in her arms. She wept. Great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. She held the twins and rocked them and whispered words Rosa could not hear. The boys clung to her, their small faces pressed against her shoulders. Everyone in the tent looked away. This moment was too private, too sacred for strangers to witness. But Isadora's eyes opened. Through her tears, she looked past the twins, looked at Rosa. Their gazes met. Isadora went utterly still. Her eyes moved over Rosa's face, the shape of her nose, the curve of her jaw, the color of her eyes. Recognition dawned like sunrise. No, Isadora breathed. It cannot be. She stood slowly, the twins still in her arms, and took a step toward Rosa. Then another. Rosa could not move, could not breathe. She felt pinned by that gaze, by the intensity of emotion she saw there. Rosalind? Isadora's voice broke on the name. Elodie? The tent flap opened again. Winnie stepped inside, breathing hard. Her clothes were travel-stained. Her face was bruised, but she was alive. Winnie! Rosa gasped. The older woman smiled through tears. I escaped the palace 3 days after you left, child. Rode hard to get here. She looked at Isadora. Your Majesty, this is... I know who she is. Isadora's voice was barely a whisper. She took another step toward Rosa, close enough now to touch. Her hand reached out, trembling, and cupped Rosa's cheek. You have your father's eyes, she said softly. But everything else, you are all mine. Tears streamed down her face. 13 years I have waited, and now you are here. You brought my sons home. Rosa's own tears fell hot and fast. I did not know. I did not know you were my mother. I did not know you wanted me. Isadora made a sound like a wounded animal. She pulled Rosa into her arms, the twins pressed between them, and held on with a strength that spoke of 13 years of longing. I wanted you every day, she whispered fiercely. Every moment. I never stopped wanting you. I never stopped loving you. Rosa collapsed against her, against this woman who was a stranger but also the person she had been searching for her entire life without knowing it. Around them, the people in the tent quietly withdrew. Even Winnie, though she stayed near the entrance, giving them privacy but ready if needed. Isadora held Rosa and the twins, her children, all 3 of them together for the first time in 13 years. And outside the tent, Barnaby lay on his cot and listened to the sound of Isadora's voice, the voice he had not heard in over a decade, and felt his own tears fall silent and unnoticed in the dim light. The journey was over. But the story of their healing had only just begun. The days that followed their arrival passed in a haze of healing and discovery. Barnaby recovered slowly under the care of skilled healers. The poison had left his body weak, but the combination of medicine and the twins' miraculous healing ability worked wonders. Within a week, he could stand without assistance. Within 2, he could walk the camp perimeter. Rosa watched him carefully, watched the way his eyes sought out Isadora's tent, even when he pretended not to. Watched the way his hands clenched when he heard her voice giving orders to her commanders. Isadora ran her war camp with quiet efficiency. She had been gathering forces for months, preparing to march on the palace and reclaim what Matthias had stolen. But now that she had her sons back, now that she had Rosa, the urgency had shifted into something else. First, there was healing to be done. Rosa spent hours with Isadora each day. Sometimes they spoke. More often, they simply sat together while the twins played nearby, learning each other through silence and small gestures. Isadora told stories of Rosa's infancy, the way she had laughed before she could speak, the way she had reached for her mother's face with tiny perfect hands. I used to stand outside the kitchens, Isadora said one afternoon, her voice distant with memory. Winnie would bring you to the window, just for a moment, just so I could see you were alive and growing. Rosa sat cross-legged on the carpet of Isadora's tent, Sebastian and Theodore building towers with wooden blocks beside her. The late afternoon sun filtered through the canvas, painting everything in shades of amber. Did you ever try to escape before? 7 times. Isadora's smile was bitter. Matthias caught me every time. After the 3rd attempt, he told me if I tried again, he would have you killed. Rosa reached out tentatively and took her mother's hand. Isadora's fingers closed around hers with desperate strength. Winnie helped me escape. She and others loyal to me. We fled in the night, and I have been gathering an army ever since. You do not have to now. We are here. Isadora looked at her daughter, 13 years old, small for her age, still bearing the scars of a lifetime of cruelty, but alive, brave, whole. You brought them to me. You walked through wilderness and danger to return my sons. You wanted me. All this time you wanted me. Rosa's voice broke. That is enough. They sat together as the sun set, hands clasped, while the twins dozed between them. On the 10th day, Barnaby appeared at Isadora's tent. Rosa was inside, helping the twins dress after their afternoon nap. She heard the guard announce a visitor and Isadora's sharp intake of breath. Send him in. Rosa looked up as Barnaby entered. He moved stiffly, favoring his injured side, but he was clean and dressed in simple but well-made clothes. Someone had trimmed his hair and beard. He looked younger than he had in the forest. less like a hermit and more like the swordmaster he had once been. He stopped just inside the tent entrance. His eyes found Isadora and held. The silence stretched. Rosa gathered the twins and slipped quietly toward the back of the tent, giving them privacy. But she could not help listening. "Your Majesty?" Barnaby's voice was formal. "Do not." Isadora's response was sharp. "Do not call me that, not you. It has been 12 years. I am not certain I have the right to use your given name anymore. You saved my daughter's life. You protected my sons and brought them safely home. You have every right." Barnaby's jaw worked. "Rosa told me about what he did to you." "I suspect she only told you a fraction of it." Another silence. Rosa peeked around the partition and saw them standing 10 feet apart, the space between them heavy with unspoken words. "You look well," Barnaby said finally. "You look like you have been living in a cave." "I have, more or less. By choice? Well, what other choice did I have? Your husband destroyed my reputation, made it impossible for me to work anywhere." Isadora flinched. "I tried to stop him." "I know." Barnaby took a step closer. "I never blamed you, Isadora. Not for one moment. You should have. You were 18 years old and did what your family demanded. That is not choice. That is duty." Isadora turned away, her shoulders tight. "I thought of you often. Wondered if you were alive, if you found someone else." Barnaby's voice went very soft. "There has never been anyone else. There never could be." Rosa saw her mother's back go rigid, saw her hands clench at her sides. "Barnaby, do not. I am not asking for anything. I just needed you to know. After all these years, I needed you to know that what I felt for you did not die." Isadora turned back to face him. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I felt it too, and I hated myself for it. Hated that I could not love my husband because my heart belonged to someone I could never have." They stood there, 12 years of longing and loss between them. Then Isadora crossed the space between them and took Barnaby's scarred hands in hers. "But I am no longer married. I am no longer that powerless princess. I am a queen in my own right now. And if I want to hold your hand, no one can tell me I cannot." Barnaby's eyes closed. His fingers tightened around hers. "Isadora, we are not young anymore. We have both been broken by life. But we are here. We are alive. And I do not want to waste another day pretending I do not care for you." Barnaby opened his eyes. Whatever he saw in her face made something in him finally, fully relax. "I am not worthy of a queen. You are worthy of me. That is all that matters." And there in the amber light of the tent, with Rosa pretending not to watch and the twins sleeping peacefully nearby, Barnaby raised Isadora's hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles with a tenderness that made Rosa's throat ache. 3 weeks after their arrival, a messenger came. Rosa was in the training yard watching soldiers practice. She had begun learning basic self-defense from one of Isadora's guards. Simple moves, how to break a grip, how to fall without injury. The twins sat on a bench nearby, eating apples and cheering whenever Rosa successfully blocked a strike. A rider approached the camp gates at speed. The guards challenged him. He spoke urgently. Within minutes, Isadora and Barnaby emerged from the command tent. Rosa left her training and hurried over, the twins trailing behind her. The messenger wore the colors of a neutral house. He held out a sealed letter to Isadora. "From King Matthias, Your Majesty. I was paid to deliver it safely." Isadora took the letter as if it might bite. She broke the seal and read in silence. Her expression shifted from suspicion to disbelief. "What does it say?" Barnaby asked quietly. Isadora handed him the letter without a word. He read it, his frown deepening. This could be a trap. Of course it could. But if even a word of this is true— "What?" Rosa asked. "What does it say?" Isadora knelt down so she was eye level with her daughter. "Your father is ill, gravely ill. He asked to see us. He says he wants to make amends before he dies." Rosa's blood went cold. "I do not want to see him." "I understand, neither do I, but what? He tried to kill me. He tortured you for 13 years. Isadora cupped Rosa's face gently. "You are right, he deserves nothing. But this is not about what he deserves. This is about what you need. I do not need anything from him. Are you certain? Because hatred can poison everything. I want you to have the chance to be free of that poison." Rosa shook her head. "I cannot." "Then you do not have to, but I am going, not for him, for me. I need to look him in the eye and tell him exactly what he took from me." Barnaby placed a hand on Isadora's shoulder. "If you go, I go with you." That night, Rosa lay awake in her tent, staring at the canvas ceiling. The twins slept peacefully beside her, their small bodies warm against hers. She thought about Matthias, about the anger she carried, the hurt, the years of believing she was nothing. And she thought about Winnie's last words to her in the forest. You are stronger than you know. When dawn came, Rosa found Isadora preparing for the journey. I am coming with you. Isadora turned, surprise clear on her face. Rosa, you do not have to. I know I do not have to. I want to. I need to face him. Not for him, for me. Isadora studied her daughter's face. Then she nodded slowly. All right, but the twins stay here. It was agreed. Winnie would watch Sebastian and Theodore. Barnaby would accompany Isadora and Rosa, and they would ride to the palace under flag of truce. The journey took 4 days. When the palace came into view, Rosa felt her chest tighten. It looked smaller than she remembered. Less grand, more like a prison. They entered through the main gates under heavy guard. Matthias had indeed called for a truce, but his soldiers watched them with wary eyes. Barnaby kept his hand on his sword hilt the entire way. They were led not to the throne room, but to a small chamber in the residential wing. And there, in a bed draped with silk, lay King Matthias. Rosa barely recognized him. He had aged a decade in the months since she had seen him. His golden hair was streaked with white. His face was gaunt and pale. His hands trembled with palsy. He looked up as they entered. His eyes found Isadora first. You came. I came to hear what you have to say. Matthias's gaze shifted to Barnaby. Something flickered across his face. Shame, perhaps. The swordmaster. I should have known you would find her again. Barnaby said nothing. Then Matthias looked at Rosa. His expression crumbled. Rosalind. Rosa stood frozen. All the words she had planned died in her throat. I do not expect forgiveness, Matthias said, his voice weak. I know what I am. Then why ask us here? Isadora's voice was hard. To tell you the truth, all of it. He gestured weakly to chairs nearby. After a moment's hesitation, Isadora sat. Barnaby remained standing, Rosa perched on the edge of the chair, ready to flee. Matthias closed his eyes. When you were born, Rosalind, I was terrified. A seer had told me my first child would bring down my reign. So when you were born without a wolf, I convinced myself the prophecy was wrong. He opened his eyes. But I was wrong. The prophecy was not about power. It was about love. The moment Isadora held you, she loved you more than anything in this world. More than me, and I could not bear it. His voice broke. I was jealous of my own infant daughter. So I took you from her. I told myself it was mercy. But the truth is, I wanted you to suffer. I wanted to prove that you were nothing. Isadora made a sound of disgust. Matthias continued, Every day for 13 years I knew where you were. I watched you grow, watched you be mocked and beaten, and I told myself you deserved it. Tears ran down his wasted face. Then you saved my sons. You did what no one else could, and it drove me mad, because it meant the prophecy was true. You were stronger than me, braver. So you tried to kill me. I tried to send you away where I would never have to see the proof of my own cruelty. He looked at Isadora. You brought our children back together. You did what I spent 13 years trying to prevent. He closed his eyes again. The prophecy has come true. My reign is over. I abdicated 3 weeks ago. I have nothing left except this dying body and the weight of everything I destroyed. Silence filled the room. Rosa felt tears on her face but did not know when they had started falling. Why are you telling us this? Isadora asked. Because I want you to know it was never about you. My cruelty, my jealousy, it was all mine. You were perfect. The failure was always mine. He looked at Rosa. You deserved a father who cherished you. Instead, you got a monster. And despite everything, you became someone worthy, someone brave and kind and strong. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. I am sorry. I know those words mean nothing, but I am sorry. Rosa stood abruptly. The chair scraped against the floor. She moved toward the door, then stopped. She turned back. For 13 years, I believed I was worthless because you told me I was. Her voice shook but did not break. You almost destroyed me, and you are right. Sorry means nothing. It does not give back the years you stole. Matthias bowed his head. Rosa took a breath. But I am not going to let hatred for you poison the rest of my life. So yes, I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, because I deserve to be free of you. She turned to Isadora. Can we go home now? Isadora stood, her eyes shining with fierce pride. She looked at Matthias one last time. My daughter has more grace than you ever deserved. As for me, I will never forgive you, but I will let you go. You are nothing to me now. She took Rosa's hand. Goodbye, Matthias. They walked out together. Barnaby followed, closing the door with finality. In the courtyard, Rosa stopped and breathed deeply. The air tasted of freedom. Isadora pulled her close. "I am so proud of you." Rosa leaned into her mother's embrace and let herself be held. The journey home was lighter somehow, as if leaving the palace had lifted a weight Rosa had not known she was carrying. They rode back to the camp. With Matthias abdicated and his brother ruling, Isadora had no need for an army. She began the process of disbanding her forces, sending soldiers home to their families. "What will you do now?" Rosa asked one evening as they sat by the fire. The twins were already asleep, curled together like puppies. Isadora looked at Barnaby, who sat across the fire. He glanced up and smiled. "We are going to find a place of our own," Isadora said, "somewhere far from palaces. A home where we can be a family. The four of us, 5 if Barnaby agrees to stay." Barnaby set down his whetstone. "Wild horses could not drag me away." Rosa felt warmth bloom in her chest. A family, a real family. "Where will we go?" "There is a valley 2 days north of here. Good land, a river for fishing. We could build something there." And they did. 18 months after their escape from the palace, the house was finished. It was not grand. Just a large, sturdy home built of wood and stone with wide windows that let in sunlight in a garden where vegetables grew in neat rows. Winnie had come with them, of course. She ran the household with the same efficiency she had once run the palace kitchens. But here she smiled more, laughed more. The twins, now nearly 4 years old, had grown strong. They ran through the forest with the confidence of children who knew they were loved. They shifted between human and wolf forms as easily as breathing. Barnaby and Isadora had married quietly in a ceremony attended only by family. No grand celebration, just 2 people who had waited 12 years, finally allowed to love each other openly. Rosa watched them sometimes, saw the way they moved around each other with unconscious synchronicity. The way Barnaby's hand would find Isadora's shoulder as he passed. The way she would lean into his touch without thought. It made her believe in love. Real love. On a bright autumn morning, Rosa walked through the forest with Sebastian and Theodore. They were hunting for mushrooms, a task that had devolved into the twins racing each other between trees while Rosa followed. She was 14 and a half now, taller than she had been, stronger. Her hair was longer, braided down her back. She wore sturdy clothes made for work and play. She was happy, genuinely deeply happy. The twins had shifted to wolf form and were play fighting in a clearing ahead. Rosa smiled and moved to join them when she heard Sebastian yelp. Not a playful sound, a sound of pain and fear. Rosa ran. She burst into the clearing and saw Sebastian on the ground, his small wolf body twisted at an odd angle. A heavy branch had fallen from the tree above, pinning his hind leg. Theodore was trying to push the branch off, whining desperately. Rosa dropped to her knees beside them. "It is all right, I am here." She examined the branch. It was too heavy for her to lift alone. And Sebastian's leg, she could see it was broken. Sebastian whimpered and tried to crawl toward her. "Do not move, baby. Please." Theodore shifted to human form and threw his small arms around Rosa, crying, "Brother hurt. Make better." "I know, sweetheart, but I need you to be brave. Can you run back to the house and get Mama and Barnaby?" Theodore nodded, tears streaming down his face. He shifted back to wolf form and ran faster than Rosa had ever seen him move. Rosa turned her attention to Sebastian. She carefully moved the branch just enough to free his leg. He yelped again, and the sound cut through her like a knife. "I am so sorry, little one." She gathered him into her arms, trying to support the injured leg. Sebastian pressed his face against her chest and shook with pain and fear. Rosa felt something rise inside her. Not panic, something else. Something primal and fierce and protective. She would not let her brother suffer. The feeling grew, intensified. Her skin began to tingle. Her bones began to ache in a way that was not quite pain. Rosa gasped. She knew what this was. Her first shift. She tried to fight it. Sebastian needed her to get him home. But her body had other ideas. The transformation took her with a force that drove her to her knees. She felt her bones reshape, her muscles reform. Fur erupted from her skin in waves of silver white. When it was over, Rosa stood on 4 legs for the first time in her life. She looked down at Sebastian, who stared up at her with wide eyes. Even in his pain, he seemed amazed. Rosa, now a silver wolf larger than she had expected, carefully picked Sebastian up by the scruff of his neck, the way a mother wolf would carry her pup. She set off toward home at a loping run. It felt natural, right, as if this form had been waiting inside her all along. She reached the house to find everyone pouring out. Isadora, Barnaby, Winnie. Theodore running ahead, still crying. Rosa shifted back to human form as she laid Sebastian on the ground. The transformation was easier this time. Instinctive. His leg is broken. Barnaby knelt beside Sebastian and examined the injury with experienced hands. It is bad, but not beyond healing. We need to set it. He looked at Isadora. She nodded and knelt on Sebastian's other side. Together they worked to set the bone while Sebastian whimpered. Theodore pressed against Rosa, and she held him tight, whispering comfort. When it was done, Barnaby wrapped the leg carefully. He will heal. Give it a few weeks. Sebastian had shifted back to human form and now lay exhausted in Isadora's arms. She held him close and rocked gently. Only then did she look up at Rosa, at the silver fur still clinging to Rosa's arms. You shifted. Rosa nodded, still shaking. Isadora's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. How? Sebastian was hurt and I needed to protect him. And then it happened. Winnie stepped forward and cupped Rosa's face in her worn hands. Your wolf was always there, child. It just needed love to wake it up. Barnaby placed a hand on Rosa's shoulder. A silver wolf. Do you know how rare that is? Isadora stood, still holding Sebastian. She looked at her daughter with eyes full of pride and wonder. It means you are exactly who you were always meant to be. Not broken, just waiting for the right moment to bloom. That evening, after Sebastian had been put to bed with Theodore curled protectively beside him, the family gathered around the fireplace. Rosa sat between her mother and Barnaby, feeling Winnie's presence behind her chair like a blessing. In the house behind them, a baby cried. Not Sebastian or Theodore. A new sound, the sound of the infant daughter Isadora had given birth to 3 months ago. A little girl with Barnaby's gray eyes and Isadora's dark hair. Barnaby emerged with the baby in his arms. I believe someone wants her big sister. Rosa took the baby and held her close. Little Mara, named for the woman who had helped them all escape. She settled against Rosa's chest and sighed contentedly. Rosa looked at her family, at Isadora and Barnaby standing close, at Winnie watching from the doorway, at the house full of love and hope. This was not the life she had dreamed of in that palace cupboard. It was better, because she had learned the most important truth. She was not defined by what others thought of her. She was defined by her choices, by her courage, by her capacity to love and forgive and grow. She was Rosalind, daughter, sister, silver wolf, survivor. She was enough. She had always been enough. And in the silver moonlight, with her family around her and the future stretching bright before her, Rosa finally, fully believed it.